There is nothing more wondrous or magical than feeling seen and understood. Finding someone who speaks your language, who you know deep in their soul know exactly how you feel. The last few years have been an interesting time for trans people. Hell, the last few months. On the one hand, we have a president who, for the first time in the country's history, has not only acknowledged that trans people exist, but also specifically put in protections for us. We have, arguably, more visibility now than at any other point in modern history. And yet, all of this doesn't come without problems. So-called gender-critical or trans-exclusionary radical fuckheads have made the internet kind of a dark and dangerous place for trans people. And even figures in our community who are larger than life, like Laverne Cox, are not immune to physical violence and bigotry. And yet, in a way that cannot possibly be overstated, I feel fortunate and happy. Happy to be who I am, and happy to know that no matter whatever else happens or how hard it gets, there are always going to be people who understand me. I am seen, I am understood, and not just by other trans people. I feel particularly seen by a group of people who I definitely talk about a lot, and not just on YouTube either, literally every facet of my life, but that you may not initially expect. This may come as a great surprise to the gender-critical hordes, but butches and studs actually have a great deal in common with trans people, and more specifically, trans women. A lot of butches I know and have become very good friends with over the last year and a half have a very deep and spiritual understanding of dysphoria. That feeling of wrongness, not just in your own body, but how your body is perceived by others. They aren't men, of course, but they don't necessarily identify with traditional ideas of womanhood either. In fact, some don't really identify with either gender, which brings an entirely different set of dysphoria. This is by no means a new phenomenon. In fact, one of the foremost authors on the Butch experience, Leslie Feinberg, wrote about this in her book, Stone Butch Blues. Quote, "Who was I now, woman or man? That question could never be answered. As long as those were the only choices, it could never be answered if it had to be asked. I remembered what it was like to walk a gauntlet of strangers who stare, their eyes angry, confused, intrigued. Woman or man? They are outraged that I confuse them. The punishment will follow. The only recognition I can find in their eyes is that I am other. I am different. I will always be different. I will never be able to nestle in my skin against the comfort of sameness." Honestly, reading these quotes, I can't help but feel that sense of otherness. That feeling that the world views you as less than human, not deserving of respect or dignity or even love. So much so that, honestly, I feel like these words could have easily been written by a trans woman, because it's very obvious that Leslie Feinberg is someone who understood the experiences of dysphoria and what it's like to have to deal with the hate and vitriol that trans women face on a daily basis. Almost every butch I know could have written that exact same passage. Dysphoria is by no means a universal experience, but there are commonalities that most of us who have experienced it at some point in our life can relate to. The feeling of not feeling right in yourself, the feeling of trying to fit in but hating it every step of the way, feeling of looking in the mirror and feeling like everything is wrong but you can't quite figure out why, and then realizing why and going, oh shit. The TERFs would have you believe that butches and trans women have absolutely nothing in common because, well, trans women aren't women. To them, trans women aren't even human. But the thing of it is, a lot of the talking points that have been popularized by the transphobic movement are talking points that have been lobbed against cis gays and lesbians for years. The dehumanization of the queer community is not at all new. This fear-mongering, pearl-clutching, "Won't somebody please think of the children?" decrying attitude was the exact same stuff the Republicans were using against the cis queer community during the 80s and 90s and all throughout the AIDS pandemic. The difference now is the people who are spreading all this anti-trans bigotry are people who claim to be a part of the LGBTQIA itself, or at least claim to speak for the community. JK Rowling. This is how you end up with talking points like the Drop the T campaign, which suggested that somehow the trans community no longer had a place in the LGBTQIA overarching community, or how TERFs send dehumanizing language to trans people online, like calling them it or thing or referring to them as men, making it very clear that they see you as less than human, that they see you as some sort of monster, or the seemingly endless stream of so-called bathroom bills that TERFs love to co-sponsor. Speaking of which, do you know who else tends to get wrapped up in the whole "you don't look like you belong in this bathroom, therefore you can't be in here" debacle? You guessed it. Butches and studs. Why? Because they don't fit into traditional gender norms. Oftentimes, they're known for keeping their hair short or wearing clothing that's typically associated with men. And this in turn makes them targets of these anti-trans bathroom bills right alongside trans women. And the truth is, TERFs really don't care who it harms as long as it also harms trans people. That is the whole point. They happily climb into bed with the alt-right white supremacists and borrow their talking points, and they don't care who it ends up hurting. They don't care that they're getting into bed with people who actively hate them for being gay. Frankly, I would argue they wouldn't care if they set the entire queer rights movement back decades, just so long as it harmed trans women in the process. That is, unfortunately, the ultimate goal. And, you know, TERFs will try to argue with me on this, and many have, that I'm somehow being unfair or misrepresenting what they stand for. But I think you need only read how they speak to trans people online, or how they speak amongst each other when they think no one is looking, to find out exactly what they think. I've witnessed firsthand entire blogs just dedicated to sharing and reblogging pictures of trans women in order to make fun of them, laugh at them, be disgusted by them. Historically speaking, TERFs have been known to dox trans women, to call their schools, their families, their work, to try and out them to anyone who might be interested and who could potentially harm them. They do everything they can to get them kicked out of their housing situation, all while decrying concern. Concern for women, concern for children, concern for everyone except the actual trans people they're harming. A lot of TERFs like to use the term that trans women are men, or biologically male, because apparently taking one biology class in high school suddenly makes you an expert. It's unfortunate because the reality is I don't think that a generalized fear of men and the threat that they might pose is unwarranted. I don't think I have a single friend who is a woman who hasn't been affected in some way by harassment or violence at the hands of men. But that's the thing. The TERF argument isn't really about protecting women, because the truth is trans women are not immune to harassment and assault at the hands of cis men. In fact, we tend to experience it at a much higher rate, particularly for Black and brown trans women. To say nothing of the fact that women can and sometimes are perpetrators of violence themselves, both against other women and against men. But honestly, that's not what this video is about. It isn't about TERFs, and it isn't about violence. That took up way too big a portion of this video, and I'm sorry for that, but that is not, in fact, what the crux of this video is about. Actually, it's about the joy of being seen. It's about being understood and the beauty and wondrousness of the butch femme experience and how that relates to me very specifically as a trans femme woman. Honestly, there's just something so magical about knowing that someone understands what you're going through. Knowing that there are just certain things that you're not going to be comfortable with because of dysphoria, and knowing that you don't have to explain it or justify it because they just get it. Honestly, they understand it in a way that no cis man ever has or will. One of the things I've come to realize is that my love for butches and studs is even deeper and more profound because I am a trans woman. Because I know that most of them have experienced dysphoria to some degree, and therefore they understand things that sometimes you can't put into words. This is not to say that femmes or even lesbians who don't identify as either femme or butch can't experience dysphoria. Anyone can. Nor is this to suggest that I think you need to experience dysphoria in order to be trans. Obviously, that's not the case. Whether we realize it or not, most of us really just want to be seen by someone else. We want to be understood. We want desperately to have that connection with another human being who just gets it, who just gets us. Someone who can speak your language without you ever having to translate for them. Lots of people can emphasize with dysphoria. My cis friends and my family all get it on a macro level, but for someone to understand you, to really understand you as a person, understand your pain because they felt it, understand your joy because they've felt that too, understand how the right dress or the right shirt or the right shoes can make you feel just amazing. That's unparalleled. In a way, I feel like the butch experience is actually more complicated than my experience as a binary trans woman. Because, as I've said in many videos in the past, I don't really experience much dysphoria these days. Sure, there are the rare moments where something just hits you out of nowhere and you don't really know why, but for the most part, I would say that my transition has made it so that I am comfortable in my skin. It doesn't hurt that my gender isn't questioned in the outside world. Oh sure, there are people online who already know that I'm trans and like to pretend that it's so obvious, but when I'm out in public, it's not something I ever have to worry about. There is no question of my womanhood, and in that respect, I have it a lot easier. Because the fact of the matter is, for a lot of butches, that feeling of otherness that Leslie Feinberg described never really goes away. Even when they go out of their way to dress in clothing that makes them feel more at home in themselves and more comfortable, they still find themselves the subject of scorn and ridicule in the outside world. And that's why I, as a trans woman, feel that I see and understand butches in a much different way than others. I see that desire for understanding, and my instinct as a femme kicks in to want to protect them from the world. Those who know me well know that I am deeply protective of those that I care about. And this is especially true for butches and studs, because nobody should have to go through life hated for who they are. Nobody should have to find themselves disrespected or misunderstood. Ironically, even as I say this, I know that there will be people who will inevitably choose to misunderstand and misrepresent me. But you know, that's okay. Because in the end, I know that there are butches and studs out there who do understand me. Being trans is by no means easy. Neither is being butch for that matter. But there is something beautiful and wonderful about being seen by another person and knowing without a doubt that they understand. It's why we flock to each other, and no TERF, or anyone else for that matter, can take that away from us. Those of us who know and love butches are incredibly blessed to do so. And I'd like to think that they feel the same about trans women too. Lastly, I'd like to give a special thanks to several of my friends who looked over this video and gave it some of their thoughts and input. It honestly meant the world to me, and I cannot possibly thank you enough. So thank you guys, it really, really means a lot. Also, one last thing, if I may. If you're a TERF and you feel the need to comment on this video or say something nasty, please don't waste my time or yours, because I will not read it and it will be blocked. Thank you. I mean, the thing of it is, like, my whole point about saying, like, you know, no cis man will ever understand. I'm obviously someone who in the past has dated cis men and thought I was in love with them. That was a whole other story. And so my experience is more with men than with women. But I do find that it's not an experience they can understand. There is something very wonderful and magical and special about being seen by another person. There is something wonderful and magical and special about sharing your experience and having someone say, oh my God, I know exactly what that's like. Even having to share that experience, just knowing through communication with them that they know exactly what you're talking about, that they have been through something similar, they know what that's like, they know what dysphoria is like, they know what that feels like, and you're having this conversation with them, and you're having this back and forth, and you're both like, it's like two sides of the same coin. You understand each other in a way that just goes beyond words. You understand what that's like. And it's just, it's you complement each other in a way that it's just really, really special. And I feel like if you don't know what that's like, and you don't experience that, and I'm specifically talking about the dysphoric factor, but I think there's a lot of other reasons why butches and studs have a lot more in common with trans people than they don't. That was just kind of one of the big ones that came to mind. I think, you know, actually one of my friends pointed out that it's also the fact that butches and studs, like trans women, are often seen as, you're doing femininity wrong, you're doing womanhood wrong according to, you know, certain groups of people. There is this sort of idea that like you have to be a certain type of woman to be important or desirable or seen by the world at large. And it is interesting because I know that there are a lot of butch and stud leaning people who tend to feel as though, you know, the only place they really understand or they really feel seen and understood is by femmes online, because in the real world there are so many people who look at them like, what the hell are you doing? Who are you? And, you know, I think as trans people, we certainly understand that feeling of really only getting to be ourselves sometimes online. I think that's one of the beauties of the internet, is that you can really be yourself in a way online that you don't necessarily get to do in person, if that makes sense. Because a lot of times, you know, online in some spaces, it's not true of every space certainly, but in certain spaces, you know, you can curate your own space online, and so you can have the opportunity to sort of play around with what you want your pronouns to be or what you want to be called, and people respect that a lot of times more when you've curated your own space online than they would anywhere else. It's how, you know, you can be known as kind of whatever you want. And it's how I think a lot of young people, and it's why a lot of young people flock to these spaces to sort of experiment with their gender and figure out what that means to them. And I think that's a really important thing. And, you know, because the outside world, you know, maybe people know, but they don't respect your gender or your pronouns. Maybe they don't respect how you identify, or your family doesn't respect it, or whatever the case may be. And I think it's really important to have the, you know, space to express yourself and find yourself. I think it's unfortunate that in the real world, and I hate using that term because I hate the idea that online is somehow not related to offline, you know, real life people are still behind those pages. Yeah, sometimes it's bots, but for the most part, you know, these are real people who are really being affected by these things. So this idea of like, you know, online world versus offline world and never the two shall meet, I don't like that idea. I've never liked that idea. But this idea, you know, it's unfortunate to me that, you know, in the offline world, so many times, you know, trans people, butches, studs, you know, all kinds of different non-binary people, all kinds of different people aren't respected offline the way they are in their own curated online spaces. And people wonder why, if you're not a cis-het white man, you don't want to have these arguments with people. It's not, you know, you've curated the space because that's where you feel as though you are safe and you are understood and seen. And that's something that some people can't ever understand, and they can't ever understand it because for them, you know, oh, you're just a little snowflake who can't handle, you know, a little joke. No, it's not a little joke when it's constant piling on. And so I think, you know, the reason why for so many people, the internet is like this great safe space, which is its own kind of thing, because unfortunately the internet is definitely not safe in many, many ways. But I think the reason why those curated sections of the internet are so important to people, including trans people, including gender non-conforming people, butches, studs, non-binary, all of the above, you know, is because you're so often not understood in the offline world. And I think it's sad. I think it's unfortunate. I think that's not how it should be. You know, I'm certainly grateful and happy to sort of provide that for people wherever I can. And I want people in my life who I know personally to feel, regardless of the internet, regardless of that, you know, separation between us, that I do really care and that I am really here and that I do mean what I say. And so, you know, the reason I talk about butches and studs very specifically in so many of my videos, I can't say all, but in so many of my videos, especially now, is because I know that in the offline world, they don't get to hear this. They don't get to see themselves praised and loved like that, the way they deserve. And that's so heartbreaking to me and so unfortunate. And so for me, it's something that I really, really want to do. It's something that's really important to me to say, you know, I see you, I understand, and I love you, and I adore you, and I think you are worthy of everything. And I think that's so important because so many people don't feel that, and they don't have that coming from anywhere else. And if I can be the person to say it, then I am very, very happy to do so, and I will do so. And so it is something that I talk about a lot because I'm very, very passionate about it. And anyone who knows me well knows that I am not good at shutting up about anything that I'm passionate about. And so, you know, here we are, yet another video on this topic, and I'm not mad about it. I don't, you know, but one of the things I was thinking about this because I had so many really wonderful comments about my video about, you know, loving butches and all of that in my original video a few months back. It was last year, but it was a few months back. And there were a lot of people who said, I've seen this written like online, but I've never heard it said out loud. And I just thought, you know, it really wasn't my expectation or intention to be like this, you know, the first person to say it out loud for people, but I am really glad that I got to be. I think that's a really special moment to sort of be the one to say out loud so you can hear it, that you are worthy of love and you are wonderful and handsome and desirable. And I think that's something that too many people don't get to hear, and too many people don't believe about themselves because there are other forces trying to tell them that the opposite is true. And so as someone who, you know, unfortunately being a bigger girl, being someone who grew up wearing glasses since the 3rd grade, being someone who was very, very effeminate, and for a long time that was not well received for me as a young person, I understand that experience of not feeling worthy and not feeling beautiful and not feeling, you know, strong within myself. And so now that I do have that after years and years of work, I want to spread that around so that other people can experience it, because I think it's something that you should be able to experience. And I know that it's not, you know, one person on the internet saying you are worthy, you are valuable, isn't going to necessarily change the world, but I think if it helps one person, then it's worth it to me.